Salvage by user Rantarian. Chapter 6 Robotic Death Machine. Right then, Adrian said, having taken a moment to gather his thoughts after the most recent of events turned his plan into shit. Trix, you stay here and treat these two like they're the enemy. I don't want them using the distraction to fuck us over. Tricor nodded, making sure the two Cortai could both see the canister in her hand. Don't worry, I'll make sure they don't go anywhere. Adrian nodded. Good. Cheer and Kamada with me. I need to go and get the prototype. Do you think you two can hold it off?
No, grumbled Zrypov, but we'll manage it somehow if you're quick. I haven't survived a dozen boardings to go down fighting a glorified maintenance drone.
Use this ship's hull for cover if you have to, Adrian told him. The flight deck is a fucking nightmare for infantry shit, so don't go running out into the open. Anything else? Asked Cheer. Adrian paused for a moment. Anything else you can tell me about it? He asked. Not much, Cheer said. Just that it fired a hot, intense beam that seemed as hot as plasma.
It scanned us too,
Zrypov volunteered.
Then it said no match found, but we were already withdrawing.
What the fuck does that mean? Adrian asked, then shrugged. Doesn't matter, I guess. We'll have to deal with it either way. Everyone knows what they're doing? Everyone, including the Cortai, nodded mutely. Right then, let's get this show on the fucking road.
This is insane,
muttered Zrypov as they peeked out over the barrier they'd put in place. It was really just a small cargo container that had been out on the deck. A hover lifter had been conveniently on hand for pushing it into a position of greater tactical use, and now they both cowered behind it to the sound of heavy mechanical footsteps growing ever closer.
Unknown spacecraft configuration, the machine said. Marked for destruction.
Can it do that? Cheer asked, concerned.
How should I know? Zrypov demanded. Let's see what we've got to fight it with.
2 kinetic guns and 2 fake grenades, Cheer replied immediately. Zrypov frowned.
We're going to die, aren't we?
Adrian raced down the corridors toward the soldiers' quarters. He'd never had cause to move this fast aboard the Zattersil before, and he discovered that the reduced gravity made it much harder than it had to be. At walking pace, he could compensate for the bounciness of movement, but running made that impossible, and he found himself kicking forward off of the walls as often as the floor.
How are they so short with such low gravity? He grated. Fuckers need to eat their Weet-Bix.
The soldiers' quarters were not the closest rooms to the flight deck. Those were reserved for the workshops and the workrooms of the salvage crew. They'd all preferred having the soldiers quartered some distance away, apparently feeling that this made them safer rather than the reverse. If time wasn't of the essence, or if he thought he could beat an alien death robot with his bare fists, he might have sent Cheer and Zrypov to get the weapon for him, if they could lift it. But death robots might be a stretch for even a human. Finally, he said with a grunt as he flew into the quarters and kicked his leg out against the opposing wall to stop himself. He opened the door to his storage unit with so much force that he tore it off its hinges, and he tossed the broken pieces aside with disgust as he reached in and took out both parts of the prototype. Large holes had been punched through the container, and pools of steaming polymer were hardening on the floor as they filled the air with a gag-inducing stench. It's still advancing, Cheer said needlessly. At least it hasn't managed to hit us yet.
Our weapons do about as much to it as they do to the human, Zrypov complained. We're up shit creek, as the human has said. How do you suggest we keep this thing distracted?
Maybe you could run out there waving your arms about to distract it, Cheer suggested.
Are you serious?
Zrypov asked, completely aghast.
Of course I'm not serious, Cheer hissed. I have no doubt that if Adrian does not get back soon that we're going to die. Then if I'm going to die, I'm at least going to try to get a good look at this thing, Zrypov replied. I won't have it said that Zrypov died cowering like a pondling.
I'll look too, Cheer decided. From the other side. Maybe we'll have to think about who to shoot and give us both enough time to live through it.
Right then, said Zrypov. On 3. On 3.
1, said Cheer.
2, said Zrypov. 3,
they said together, and rounded opposite sides of the container with weapons firing. They each got enough time to get a good look at it before fleeing back into cover. I see we both survived, Cheer said, although he could have been happier about the situation.
I've never seen anything like that, Zrypov said, shaken. I think it was mostly steel, and I think its eyes were glowing.
It was made to look like something dangerous, mused Cheer. After his experience with the reptiles on the planet, the mere appearance of such things seemed less unnerving. A reptilian predator of some kind, long neck like a ricotupture. But I could see its teeth even from here.
Sharp, but I doubt it needs them for eating, Zrypov replied. Bipedal, but with a tail. Maybe for balance? Could be a weak point. Now, if only we had the means to exploit it, Cheer said grimly. But I guess that's what we keep a human here for. Adrian glanced at the charge bar on the weapon he'd affectionately named the Spear Tosser and grimaced. Not even half charged, with 6 full power packs feeding it from a backpack he and Trixie had cobbled together from leftover Wolfigator leather. He'd been surprised to discover that the kinetic guns simply pushed their regular power production into the shot, rather than storing it in a capacitor for a more powerful discharge. And when he'd suggested it, she'd taken the concept and run with it. As a result, the lone weapon that had all the lethality of a wet fart had become a powerful kinetic cannon capable of punching explosive spearheads through half an inch of steel and hitting with the power of an angry horse when no rounds were loaded. But it needed time to charge when it had been turned off for a while, and right now he'd have just about given his left nut for the charge bar to fill, because from the distance he was covering, he'd be well and truly back onto the flight deck before that happened.
"Come on, you little bastard,"
he grunted as he kicked open the door to the flight deck to reveal a situation growing from bad to worse for his squad mates. There was a lot of distance to cover, and not much time before the metal man finally reached them. Hot ray beams shot through the increasingly porous container, often missing the two of them by a whisker. From the looks of it, Cheer and Kermit were shitting their collective pants. But when they saw him, they gave a relieved wave.
"Lasers, is it?" Adrian said to himself. "That's not a good sign."
The metal man was approaching them, its laser firing 3 times before what seemed to be a 10-second cool-off period. If it had lasers, at least it had shit lasers. He leapt atop a hover lifter and kicked the floor repeatedly, gathering speed as he pushed the hover lifter beyond all safe speeds towards the robot. The charge bar was almost full, and with the hover lifter moving with inertia, he knelt down on the platform and took careful aim. Then the robot turned towards him, and he was hit by a bright blue pulsing light. Cheer had watched in incredulity alongside Zrypov as Adrian had sped across the flight deck on a hover platform with the inertial brakes turned off. He was wearing some sort of harness with a cable attached to the long weapon in his hands, and seemed to be taking careful aim with the intent to end the battle in a single shot. Then the scam beam had hit him, and Adrian had shouted, "What the actual fuck?" before shouting an obscenity about something called a dinosaur and another thing called a Terminator. Cheer thought that both of these things sounded pretty dangerous, and if the robot was both of these things rolled into one, it was worse for all of them.
"The human is unnerved,"
Zrypov noted, likewise worried. Cheer didn't respond. He was intently focused on what Adrian was doing, watching as the human jumped from the hoverlifter's platform as the robot powered up its laser, listening as the robot announced that genetic matches were detected, staring as the robot did not immediately fire. Cheer blinked. What did it just say?
"It said genetic matches were detected,"
repeated Zrypov, and both of them stared at Adrian. Adrian watched the hoverlifter slam uselessly into the dinosaur Terminator. Dinonator? Termasaur? He'd figure out a decent name for it later. But it bore a freakish resemblance to the velociraptors of Jurassic Park, although rendered in chrome. It hadn't shot at him yet, so that was a good sign, but right now it seemed to be struggling with some kind of mystery of its own.
"Percent chance native life form, 89%, mammalian suborder," it said.
Adrian looked at the charging bar on his gun. Almost.
"Possible explanations, 46%, bioengineered fauna."
He kept looking.
Almost. 33%, evolved pet.
He took careful aim.
Almost. 18%, livestock.
"Fucking livestock!" he spat angrily, and pulled the trigger as the charge bar finally completed. A blast like rolling thunder echoed through the flight deck as the robot's metal head wrapped around an explosion, before blowing apart in pieces of shrapnel. Another clang sounded from a distant wall as a shower of metal fragments hit it. Cheer covered his ears until the painful experience was over, and even then a high-pitched ringing still remained. 3% other, motherfucker! Adrian shouted, walking over to the metal husk that still whirred and tried to figure out how to move. He had the cylinder that formed most of the length of the gun resting over one shoulder, and must have been even more rocked by the explosion than Cheer, because he swaggered as he walked. Zrypov, seeing that the danger had passed, or had at least reached a point of tolerable dangerousness, indicated to Cheer to follow him over to join Adrian at the robot. What they found when they reached there was an unimpressed-looking human examining a long power cable, radiating an expression that conveyed disgusted contempt. "Am I seriously looking at a fucking extension lead?" he asked, looking up at Cheer and Zrypov. "I was really hoping to use that gun, but if it needs a power point, then that's just fucking woeful, don't you reckon?" "It looks like the power actually goes into the robot," Cheer said. "Then it feeds into the gun." Adrian sighed, looking down with shoulders sagging. "That's really just the most disappointing thing I've heard all day, Cheer." Can't even begin to tell you. What did it mean by native life form? Zrypop asked. When it scanned the rest of us, it said no match found.
I couldn't really tell you, Adrian said with a shrug. Did look a lot like a dinosaur, though. Perhaps I may suggest an explanation, said Beckmer. And they whirled to see him now standing behind them. He was holding a kinetic gun on Tricror with one hand, and the fake grenade with the other. And then, perhaps, we could reevaluate our earlier agreement. No need to disagree, as Triafa has the ship's weapons trained on all of you. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this double upload today. My wife really wanted something to listen to on her way home from work today, so I decided that I would honor her request and I would put another one out for her today. So you guys are lucky you get a double one. Be sure to thank my wife. She really got this one going for you guys. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you later, guys. Have a great one.